At exactly 7:12 a.m., the quiet street of Maplewood Avenue exploded into chaos. Neighbors woke up to the sound of sirens. Within minutes, 30 police cars surrounded a small gray house at the corner of the street. Blue and red lights flashed across the peaceful suburban neighborhood. People peeked through their curtains. Some stepped outside with their phones, and everyone asked the same question. What could one woman possibly have done to deserve this? Because the house they were surrounding didn't belong to a criminal. It belonged to Angela Brooks. Angela Brooks was a 32-year-old black woman who had lived in that neighborhood for almost 4 years. She wasn't loud. She didn't cause trouble. Most. Neighbors barely saw her except when she watered her small garden in the evenings. She worked from home, kept to herself, and always greeted people politely. But there was something else about Angela, something people didn't know, something the police clearly didn't know either. Inside the house, Angela was making coffee when the first siren screamed past her window. She paused, then another siren, then another. Angela slowly walked toward the window, her eyes widened. Police cars, dozens of them, blocking the street, blocking her driveway, blocking everything. For a moment she simply stood there, silent. Then came the loud knock. "Police, open the door." Angela calmly set her coffee mug down. She didn't panic. She didn't run. She simply walked to the door and opened it. Standing on her small wooden porch were armed officers wearing bulletproof vests. Behind them stood more officers, and more, and more. At least 30 of them. One officer stepped forward. He was tall, muscular, and clearly the one in charge. "Angela Brooks?" he asked. Angela crossed her arms. "Yes." The officer glanced at a paper in his hand. "We have reports of suspicious activity and illegal communications coming from this address." Angela blinked slowly. "Suspicious activity?" "That's right," another officer added coldly. "We have reason to believe you're involved in a federal security threat." The words hung in the air. Neighbors gasped. Someone whispered, "Federal threat?" Phones came out. Cameras started recording. Angela looked around at the massive group of officers surrounding her small porch. Then she asked one simple question. "Do you have a warrant?" The officer hesitated just for a second. "No," he said, "but we have enough cause to investigate." Angela sighed. Then she shook her head slowly. "Then you shouldn't be here." The officer's face hardened. "Ma'am, step aside." Angela didn't move. Behind the officers, more police began moving toward the house like they were preparing to enter by force. Angela looked at them. Then she said something that made several officers laugh. "Before you make the biggest mistake of your careers." She pulled a small phone from her pocket. "You might want to let me make one call." The lead officer smirked. "Who are you calling?" Angela looked him directly in the eyes. "The Pentagon." For a moment, no one said anything. Then several officers burst out laughing. One muttered, "Yeah, right." Another officer shook his head. "This lady's crazy." But Angela didn't react. She simply dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice. Then someone answered. Angela spoke calmly. "Yes, this is Angela Brooks." She paused. Her voice remained steady. "I believe there are about 30 local officers currently attempting to illegally enter my home." Another pause. Angela listened. Then she said 5 quiet words. "Yes, sir. I'll hold the line." The lead officer crossed his arms impatiently. "You done yet?" Angela lowered the phone slightly and smiled. "Not even close." What happened 5 minutes later would shock the entire neighborhood because those 30 officers had no idea who Angela Brooks really was, and they were about to learn the hard way. For nearly 30 seconds after Angela ended the call, nothing happened. The street remained filled with flashing police lights. Officers stood around impatiently. Some of them whispered to each other. Others smirked like they were waiting for Angela to embarrass herself. The lead officer, Sergeant Daniels, crossed his arms. "All right," he said, coldly. "Show's over." Angela leaned calmly against the porch railing. "No," she replied softly. "It's just getting started." Daniels rolled his eyes. "Listen, ma'am, we don't have time for games. Either step aside or we will enter this house." A few officers stepped forward, but before they could move any closer, a police radio suddenly crackled. "Sergeant Daniels, come in." The voice sounded tense. Daniels grabbed the radio from his shoulder. "Daniels here." There was a pause. Then the dispatcher spoke again, this time with confusion in her voice. "Sergeant, the chief wants you to hold your position." Daniels frowned. "What?" "Repeat, hold your position. Do not enter the property." Several officers exchanged confused looks. Daniels pressed the radio again. "Why?" Another pause. Then the dispatcher answered quietly. He didn't say, but he sounded very serious. Daniels looked up at Angela. She simply smiled. The officers began murmuring. Something felt off. And then a black SUV suddenly turned onto Maplewood Avenue. It wasn't a police vehicle, but every officer instantly recognized the government plates. The SUV stopped beside the police cars. Two men stepped out. They wore dark suits, no uniforms, no badges on display. But the moment they appeared, the entire mood changed because officers knew exactly what those suits meant: federal agents. The men walked directly toward the house. Sergeant Daniels stepped forward. "Excuse me, this is a local investigation." One of the agents raised his hand calmly. "Sergeant Daniels?" Daniels froze. "Yes." The agent looked down at a tablet in his hand, then back at Daniels. "Why are there 30 officers surrounding the home of Angela Brooks?" Daniels hesitated. "We received a report of suspicious communications." The agent's expression did not change. "And you brought 30 officers? Without a warrant?" Daniels swallowed. "Well, we believed there could be a threat." The second agent finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm. "Sergeant, do you know who lives in this house?" Daniels glanced toward Angela, then back. "At the agents, Angela Brooks." The agent nodded slowly. "Correct." He stepped aside slightly and gestured toward Angela. "But what you don't seem to understand," his voice became colder, "is who she works for." Suddenly the police radio crackled again. This time it was Police Chief Raymond Carter. His voice sounded panicked. "Daniels! Chief! Stand down immediately!" Daniels blinked. "Sir?" "I said stand down. Pull your officers back from the house." The entire group of officers went silent. Daniels looked at Angela again, and for the first time that morning, he wasn't smiling anymore, because something told him they had made a very serious mistake. The federal agent stepped closer to Sergeant Daniels. His voice dropped lower. "You should have checked before you came here." Daniels' throat felt dry. "Checked what?" The agent looked directly at Angela Brooks, then back at Daniels. "Angela Brooks is a civilian cybersecurity contractor working with the Department of Defense." The words hit the officers like a shock wave. Some of them stared at Angela in disbelief. She looked like an ordinary woman. Jeans, t-shirt, standing quietly on a small porch, but the agent continued. "For the past 3 years, she has been working with the Pentagon on classified national security systems." Daniels felt the blood drain from his face. "You're saying—" "Yes," the agent said firmly. "The suspicious communications you detected were encrypted military transmissions." Several officers gasped. Another whispered, "Oh no." The agent continued speaking. "And those transmissions are protected under federal security law." Daniels slowly turned toward Angela. Suddenly, everything made sense. Her calm attitude, her confidence. The phone call. Angela stepped forward. She looked at the group of officers who had surrounded her house. "Now, you understand why I asked for a warrant." Daniels rubbed his forehead nervously. "Ma'am, we didn't know." Angela nodded. "I know." She looked at the federal agents. "But unfortunately, the Pentagon now does." The agents checked their tablets again. Then one of them spoke quietly. "There will be a formal review of this incident." Several officers shifted uncomfortably, but the agent wasn't finished. "And because this operation interfered with active national security systems, the Department of Defense is taking it very seriously." Daniel's heart started pounding. He suddenly realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a mistake. This could end careers, maybe even worse. The police chief's voice suddenly came through the radio again. "Daniels, are the agents there?" "Yes, sir," the chief sounded. "Exhausted. Put them on the line." Daniels handed the radio to the agent. The conversation lasted only a minute, but when the agent returned the radio, his expression was even colder. He turned toward the officers. "You will remove every vehicle from this street immediately." Nobody argued. Officers rushed toward their cars. Engines started. One by one, the police vehicles began leaving Maplewood Avenue. Neighbors stood on sidewalks watching everything unfold. Phones were still recording what had started as a dramatic police raid was now turning into something very different. A complete collapse of authority. Angela watched silently as the officers hurried away. Within minutes, only a few vehicles remained. The agents looked at Angela respectfully. "Ma'am, we apologize. For the disturbance?" Angela sighed softly. "It's not your fault." She looked down the street where the last police car was leaving. "But they're going to have a very long week." The story spread quickly. Within hours, videos of the incident were everywhere online. 30 police cars surrounding the home of a quiet woman, then suddenly leaving after federal agents arrived. People began asking questions, lots of questions. News. Reporters showed up the next day. Headlines started appearing. Local police raid defense contractor's home. Pentagon intervenes in police operation. The police department was in full damage control. Police Chief Carter held a press conference. "We are conducting an internal investigation," he said, but the truth was already clear. Someone had made a huge mistake, and that mistake had triggered a federal response. Inside the department, tension was rising. Officers whispered about possible suspensions. Sergeant Daniels sat silently in the chief's office. Chief Carter rubbed his temples. "Tell me exactly what happened." Daniels explained everything. The anonymous report, the suspicious signal, the decision to bring multiple officers, the confrontation, and finally, the call to the Pentagon. When he finished, the chief leaned back in his chair. "Daniels, do you understand what this looks like?" Daniels nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. It looks like we harassed a federal defense contractor." Daniels said nothing. The chief continued, "And now the Pentagon is involved." Outside the office, investigators were already reviewing radio calls, reports, and body camera footage. Everything was being examined, because when the Department of Defense becomes involved, mistakes are taken very seriously. Meanwhile, Angela Brooks returned to her normal life. She went back to work, back to her quiet routines, but this time, the neighborhood looked at her very differently. Neighbors waved respectfully. Some even apologized for recording videos. Angela simply smiled politely. She never bragged. She never complained. She simply continued living her life. But the officers who had surrounded her house would never forget that morning, because it had taught them a powerful lesson. Never assume you know someone's story, and never underestimate the quiet person on the porch. 2 weeks later, the investigation ended. 3 officers were suspended. Sergeant Daniels received a formal disciplinary warning, and the department introduced a new policy. Before any large-scale operation, officers would now be required to confirm whether a location was connected to federal agencies. It was a rule that would prevent another disaster, like Maplewood Avenue. One afternoon, Sergeant Daniels drove slowly past Angela's house. He saw her, standing in the yard watering her garden. For a moment he considered driving away, but instead he stopped the car. Daniels walked toward the fence. Angela looked up. "Oh," she said calmly. "Hello, Sergeant." Daniels looked embarrassed. "I just wanted to say—" "I'm sorry." Angela studied him quietly. Then she nodded. "I know." Daniels sighed. "That morning, we thought we were stopping something dangerous." Angela smiled gently. "You were?" Daniels looked confused. "What?" Angela pointed toward her house. "The systems I work on protect this country." Daniels finally understood. That morning hadn't been about stopping danger. It had been about misunderstanding it. Angela picked up her watering can again. "I hope you learned something from it." Daniels nodded slowly. "I did." He walked back toward his car. Before getting inside, he looked once more at the quiet gray house. The same house 30 officers had surrounded. The same house that had forced the Pentagon to make a phone call, and the same house that reminded an entire police department. That power doesn't always look the way you expect. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet woman standing on a porch, holding a phone, and calmly changing everything. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful and emotional stories like this. And remember, never judge someone by what you see on the surface. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most powerful connections.